I call the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure to order. Pursuant to Committee Rule 5F and the House Rule 11-2H4, the Chair may postpone further proceedings today on any question of approving any measure or matter or adopting any amendment on which a recorded vote of the yeas and nays are ordered. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Today, the committee will consider H.R. 4673, Promoting Women in Aviation Workforce Act, H.R. 5294, the Treating Barriers to Prosperity Act of 2018, H.R. 3288, the Northern Border Regional Commission Reauthorization Act of 2017, H.Con. Res. 115, Peace Officers Capitol Grounds Resolution, and H.Con. Res. 113, Greater Washington Soapbox Derby Capitol Grounds Resolution. General Service Administration Capitol Grounds Investment and Leasing Program Resolutions, H.R. 4177, Prepare Act of 2017, H.R. 5319, the Coast Guard Land Transfer, and H.R. 5326, the Maritime Technical Corrections Act of 2018. Our first item for consideration is H.R. 4673, Promoting Women in the Aviation Workforce Act. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Aviation Subcommittee and call up H.R. 4673, and that be considered as read and open amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. H.R. 4673 is an important bill that recognizes the contributions of women to aviation. It also will help support efforts to attract and retain women in the aviation professions. Given the projections for employee shortages in just about every aviation profession in the coming years, there is a definite need to tap this additional talent pool. This is a good bill, and I urge members to support. I now recognize Ms. Comstock to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to recognize Ms. Esty for her continued work on this issue. H.R. 4673 expresses that it is the sense of Congress that the aviation industry should support and promote women to pursue careers within the industry through training, education, and mentorship programs. The bill creates an advisory board to produce a comprehensive strategic plan that the administration and Congress can utilize to help support women in the aviation field with the many needed jobs we have in this area. We can all agree that ensuring a diverse workforce with sufficient number of trained employees to support the aviation sector is crucial to its continued vitality. This bill will help achieve just that. I understand that the bill will be amended to clarify a few points. I support this bill and its amendment, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. I now recognize Mr. DeFazio for a statement.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. My vice-ranking member, Ms. Esty, has recognized a real problem, which is a deficiency of women engaged in many aspects of our aviation community. And I think that this legislation, by setting up an advisory board and presenting an action plan to the FAA, will help remedy that concern. And I congratulate her on this legislation and recommend the committee do pass. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now recognize Ms. Estes for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and with indulgence, I have a brief presentation for Mr. DeFazio. He will understand when he sees it. It's a bit of a joke between us.
These are new positions established by our leadership, and Elizabeth is my first vice ranking, and I couldn't ever quite remember, so I just called her the vice ranking whatever.
Yes, so he had presented me with the vice ranking whatever, and he has his ranking there, now I've got whatever.
So there we go, now I've got one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member DeFazio for bringing the Promoting Women in the Aviation Workforce Act before the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee today, and Congresswomen Walorski, Bustos, and Walters, who introduced the legislation with me. Women make up 50% of the national workforce, but are significantly underrepresented in the aviation industry, making up only 2% of airline mechanics, 4% of flight engineers, 5% of repairmen, 26% of air traffic controllers, 18% of flight dispatchers, and 6% of pilots. To address these shortfalls, I introduced the Promoting Women in the Aviation Workforce Act with our colleagues, Jackie Wolarski, Mimi Walters, and Sherry Bustos, Sherry also of this committee. This bipartisan legislation will direct the FAA to create and facilitate an advisory board made up of representatives from major airlines and aerospace companies, nonprofit organizations within the aviation industry, aviation and engineering business associations, and institutions of higher education and aviation trade schools. The board will be tasked with developing a comprehensive plan for strategies the administration can take, including identifying trends that either directly or indirectly encourage or discourage women from pursuing careers in aviation, coordinating efforts to facilitate support for women pursuing careers in aviation, expand scholarship opportunities for women in aviation, and enhancing training, mentorship, education, and outreach programs that are exclusive to women. Companion legislation has been introduced in the Senate by Senators Collins and Duckworth. I know about this issue in part from the industry who brought these concerns to me, those who are looking for pilots. The airline industry itself is concerned about the shortfall here. We are facing an aging out of our pilots and other key positions, and again, we will not be able to fill these positions unless we warmly include and support women in this vital sector. Again, I want to thank Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member DeFazio for holding a vote on this legislation today, and I encourage my colleagues to support this bipartisan bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady and commend her for her efforts on this. This is a good piece of legislation. And I also just want to say that Peter and I, as we go through our negotiations, sometimes I get to a point where I just say, whatever, Peter. So
I'm glad to know that's where he got it from.
I'm sure some of you on the other side say the same thing to Peter, whatever. With that, I recognize Ms. Lawrence for a statement.
Thank you, Chairman Schuster, for yielding. I want to thank Congresswoman Esty and her staff for introducing H.R. 4673, promoting women in the aviation workforce, and I rise in its support. As we know, aviation is a pillar of the transportation industry. Over the years, as aviation has grown, so has its workforce, providing millions of Americans with great jobs that provide excellent benefits, travel opportunities, career growth, and competitive pay. As a country, we must stand up and advocate for the promotion of women initiatives in aviation, transportation, and infrastructure-driven industries. To further that goal, in March, I sent a letter to the Appropriations Subcommittee on Transportation requesting funding for women in the Transportation Initiative. This amazing program helps place qualified female collegiate students in transportation-related positions throughout the public and private sectors, opening doors for young women to become future leaders in this critical field. I'm proud to say that 26 members and almost every woman on this committee signed and supported this bill, and for that I thank you. But most of all, as we advocate, Mr. Chairman, on this committee for the investment in our infrastructure, we can't do that without investing in 50% of our workforce, and that is women. I say it constantly, when a woman sits at the table, the conversation changes, and it changes for the better. Through bills such as H.R. 4673 and continued support for women initiatives, we'll be one step closer to bringing equality in our nation's workforce. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Do any other members wish to be recognized? Seeing none, we will now consider the bill for amendment. Ms. Estes has an amendment at the chair, I believe.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute, which has been negotiated with the...
Without objection, so ordered. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 54, offered by Ms. Esty.
Ms. Estes is recognized to speak on her amendment.
Again, I want to thank the good work of the chairman and the ranking member in making some modifications in light of positions that are currently vacant to make sure we can fulfill these positions, and some other minor modifications. So again, I support and thank the committee and the chairman and ranking member for designing something here that we can all support. Thank you very much.
I thank the gentlelady. Any other members who wish to be recognized on the amendment?
Yes.
Ms. Comstock's recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Ms. Esty for her amendment. It includes a number of clarifications. The amendment adds institutions of higher education and aviation trade schools to the advisory board, bringing their critical expertise to the table as the board develops recommendations to help attract women to aviation professions. The amendment also clarifies the duties and reporting requirements of the advisory board and sunsets the board when its report has been completed. It will improve the overall nature of the bill, and I support this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentlelady. Any other members wish to be recognized on the amendment? Seeing none, are there amendments to the amendment? Seeing none. If not, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments? I recognize Ms. Comstock for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 4673 as amended be approved and reported favorably to the House.
The question's on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. The bill is amended and is approved and ordered reported favorably to the House. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 5294, the Treating Barriers of Prosperity Act of 2018. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Economic Development Subcommittee and call up H.R. 5294, and that it be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. This bill clarifies the role of the Appalachian Regional Commission in an effort to address the opioid crisis throughout the region. Specifically, this bill aims to mitigate adverse impacts on the region's workforce and economic development caused by opioids. I applaud Subcommittee Chairman Barletta for taking the lead on this important legislation. I thank him and Ranking Member Titus and Congressman Rogers of Kentucky for introducing this bill. I support this legislation, and now I recognize Subcommittee Chairman Barletta to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am pleased to be the sponsor of this legislation, along with Subcommittee Ranking Member Titus, Congressman Rogers of Kentucky, and Congressman Meadows. The opioid crisis has touched countless families and communities across our nation. In December, the subcommittee held a hearing to examine the impact of the opioid crisis in Appalachia. The impact is significant. In 2015, the region had a drug-related death rate 65% higher than the rest of the nation. 69% of these deaths were caused by opioids. In my home state of Pennsylvania, more than 4,600 drug-related overdose deaths were reported in 2016. An overwhelming majority of those deaths throughout Appalachia were individuals between the ages of 25 and 44, people who were in the prime working years, creating a significant barrier to attracting jobs and economic development. The Treating Barriers to Prosperity Act will help clarify the role of the Appalachian Regional Commission in addressing the impact of the opioid crisis on economic development. The bill will help facilitate the sharing of best practices among the states, support programs designed to reduce the harm to the workforce and economic growth, attract and retain health care services, businesses, and workers, and develop relevant infrastructure, including broadband, to support telemedicine. I strongly urge all my colleagues to support favorably reporting this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I now recognize Ms. Titus for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too support H.R. 5294 that was introduced by our subcommittee Chairman Barletta and myself to help address the opioid epidemic in Appalachia, which, as you heard from the statistics presented, has been especially hard hit by this crisis. It's in our subcommittee, though, which seems a little unusual, but because it impacts the ability of communities to attract new businesses and therefore to provide jobs, grow the economy, and sustain development. So this bill would address that by authorizing the Appalachian Regional Commission to provide federal assistance to individuals and entities to help alleviate that economic development situation. So I, too, would urge our colleagues to support the measure. And I yield back.
Do any other members wish to be heard? We will now consider the bill for amendment. Seeing none, I now recognize Mr. Barletta for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 5294 be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The bill is approved and ordered reported favorably to the House. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 3288, the Northern Border Regional Commission Reauthorization Act of 2017. I ask for unanimous consent to discharge the Economic Development Subcommittee and call up H.R. 3288, and to be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. H.R. 3288 reauthorizes the Northern Border Regional Commission and makes necessary changes to the commission. I urge the support of this legislation. I now recognize Subcommittee Chairman Barletta to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 3288 reauthorizes the Northern Border Regional Commission, a federal-state partnership for economic and community development in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and New York. The bill also makes necessary changes to the NBRC in order to increase the effectiveness of the Commission. I ask members to support this bill. Thank you.
I now recognize Ms. Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support our colleague Ms. Custer's bill to reauthorize the Northern Border Regional Commission and to make other changes. The measure also incorporates a bill, H.R. 3454, authored by Representative Hank Johnson to reauthorize the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission, and H.R. 5325, authored by Representative Brownlee to reauthorize the Southwest Border Regional Commission. I commend them all for their efforts to bring this matter to our attention. Regional economic development organizations have successfully leveraged federal dollars to attract businesses to their regions. Despite their success, however, the Trump administration has proposed eliminating these organizations. Current authorization for the commissions expires on September 30th of this year, so it's important that we reauthorize them now. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Do any other members wish to be heard? We will now consider the bill for amendment. Are there any amendments?
The amendment would ensure vacancies on the Commission are filled consistent with the requirements of the Vacancy Act. I support adoption.
Ms. Titus has an amendment to offer. Is there
Thank
an
you, Mr.
amendment at the
Chairman.
desk?
Yes, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 37, offered by Ms. Titus.
I now recognize Ms. Titus to speak on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer this amendment to ensure that if in the future there's no confirmed federal co-chairperson or an appointed alternate federal co-chairperson at the Northern Border Regional Commission, the federal co-chairperson, before leaving, may designate a federal employee to temporarily perform the duties and functions of the office of the federal co-person. Last month, the then federal co-chairperson resigned his position, leaving the commission without a federal co-chair or an alternate federal co-chairperson. The commission cannot function without someone fulfilling the duties and functions of the office, including the awarding of grants in a timely fashion. While Congress included language in the recent omnibus to address this situation in the short term, this amendment is necessary should a vacancy occur again. So I would urge my colleagues to support the amendment, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Any members wish to be recognized?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Barlett is
I'm going to
recognized.
try again. The amendment would ensure vacancies on the Commission are filled consistent with the requirements of the Vacancy Act, and I support adoption of the amendment.
I thank the gentleman. Are there any other members wish to be recognized? Any amendments to the amendment? Seeing none, the questions on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments? Seeing none, I recognize Mr. Barletta for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 3288 as amended be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Questions on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The bill is amended. The bill as amended is approved in order to report favorably to the House. We will next consider House Concurrent Resolution 115, authorizing the use of the Capitol grounds for the National Police Officers Memorial Service and National Honor Guard and Pipe Band Exhibition. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Economic Development Subcommittee and call up H.Con. Res. 115, and that it be considered as read and open amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. H.Con. Res. 115 would authorize the use of the Capitol grounds for the National Peace Officers Memorial Service and the National Honor Guide and Pipe Band Exhibition. These events will honor 199 men and women of law enforcement who were killed in the line of duty. I would like to thank Subcommittee Chairman Barletta and Ranking Member Titus for their leadership in sponsoring this resolution. I support the resolution and I now recognize Subcommittee Chairman Barletta to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Concurrent Resolution 115 authorizes the use of the Capitol grounds for the annual National Peace Officers Memorial Service and the National Honor Guard and Pipe Band exhibition. I am pleased to be the sponsor of this resolution along with Ranking Member Titus. These important events are held each year as part of Police Week to honor the brave men and women who have paid the ultimate price and sacrificed their lives in the line of duty. This year, 199 fallen officers will be honored, including 5 from Pennsylvania. Officer Raymond Diaz, Jr. of Philadelphia Police Department, Officer Sean Rager of the Johnstown Police Department, Officer Brian Shaw of the New Kensington Police Department, Trooper Michael P. Stewart III of Pennsylvania State Police, and Corrections Officer David M. Weaver of the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. The memorial service is critical in ensuring these fallen officers and others are honored. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution.
Thank the gentleman. I recognize Ms. Titus for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you heard, House Concurrent Resolution 115 authorizes the use of the Capitol grounds for the annual National Peace Officers Memorial Service. It'll be held on May 15th and will include a National Honor Guard and Pipe Band exhibition. Both events will be coordinated with the architect of the Capitol and the Capitol Police. According to our numbers, the National Peace Officers Memorial will honor law enforcement officers, some 128 of them, who were killed in the line of duty in 2017. 2 of those officers who were killed were from my home state of Nevada. The first police officer, Charleston Hartfield, from the Las Vegas Metro Police Department, was killed October 1st, 2017. At the worst mass shooting in modern U.S. history, the Route 91 Musical Festival in the heart of my district. Officer Hartfield was killed while shielding, protecting, and shepherding people at the concert away from danger. Officer Hartfield was an Army veteran and a member of the Nevada National Guard. The second was Detective Chad Parquet of the North Las Vegas Police Department, who was killed on January 7, 2017. Detective Parquet was killed on duty in an automobile accident. He was 32 years old and a 10-year veteran of the North Las Vegas Police Department. I truly appreciate that this memorial service will honor the tremendous sacrifice that these Nevada officers made while protecting their fellow citizens and the burden that's now placed on their families who remain. I support the resolution and urge the committee to join me in supporting it as well in tribute to our fallen law enforcement. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. And do any other members wish to be recognized? Mr. Mitchell is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Mr. Barletta and Ms. Titus for sponsoring this. As you may know, my oldest son is a police officer, a detective. He'll be in town for this event as they will be honoring a member of police officers of Michigan that also perished in the line of duty last year. I'll be joining him at the ceremony, and I encourage all members that can make it to participate. It's moving. It's important we recognize law enforcement officers for the risks they take every day when they leave the house, that in fact, some of them may not go home. So I encourage everyone to attend, and I appreciate the support. I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Do any other members wish to be heard? Seeing none. Are there any amendments? Seeing none, I now recognize Mr. Barletta for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H-Con Res 115 be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The bill is amended. The bill is not amended. The bill is approved and ordered reported favorably to the House. Okay. We will next consider House Concurrent Resolution 113, authorizing the use of the Capitol grounds for the Greater Washington Soapbox Derby. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Economic Development Subcommittee, call up H-Con Res 113, and that it be considered as read and open amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. H-Con Res 113 would authorize the use of the Capitol grounds for the annual Greater Washington Soapbox Derby. I support favorably reporting this resolution. I now recognize Subcommittee Chairman Barletta to explain the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Concurrent Resolution 113 authorizes the use of the Capitol grounds for the annual Greater Washington Soapbox Derby qualifying races on June 16, 2018. The winners of the event will go on to compete in the National Soapbox Derby in Akron, Ohio. I urge my colleagues to favorably report this resolution. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. I now recognize Ms. Titus for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank my good friend from Maryland, Representative Hoyer, for once again introducing this resolution on behalf of the Washington Regional Delegation. The Greater Washington Soapbox Derby is an annual competitive event that encourages boys and girls ages 9 through 16 to construct and operate their own soapbox vehicles. It's become a great tradition in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area that's existed over the last 20 years. It provides a terrific opportunity for children to appreciate the workmanship necessary to build the vehicles and then enjoy the thrill of competition. The Greater Washington Soapbox Derby organizers will work with the architect of the Capitol and Capitol Police to ensure the appropriate rules and regulations are in place and the event remains free to the public for all to enjoy. So I support the resolution and urge the committee to approve it. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Do any other members wish to be recognized? Seeing none, we will now, Mr. Nolan is recognized.
And commend my colleagues for introducing it. And just in a moment of levity, remind the committee of my experience, and I think an experience that went throughout the country, where kids and my friends in the neighborhood, we'd go out to the dump looking for some old bicycle wheels or tricycle wheels and scrounge for a 2x4 off an old pallet or something, and scrounge through the railroad yards for a spike we could use for an axle, and go rapidly racing down Cemetery Hill in the neighborhood where I lived, to great joy and great fun. And I think this is a nice way of celebrating that tradition, and perhaps in the process encouraging some of the youth today to put down their iPhone and their iPad, get off the couch, get outside, explore some other slightly more creative activities, and maybe build a soapbox derby and see how that goes. I think this is a nice piece of legislation to celebrate a great tradition, a great part of Americana, and like I said, get some kids off the couch outside and exploring some of the other fun and enjoyable things in life. I urge the adoption of this legislation.
Well, I thank the gentleman for that and reminding us in the past, but I think if the gentleman has seen those soapbox derbies today, they're using that technology to design these sleek machines. So again, it is a great effort on these young people, and again, you're urging them to put down their iPhone or their iPad and pick up a wood or a tool to make these things are really, that's a very positive thing, and I agree with the gentleman. Any other members wish to be heard? Mr. Mitchell?
Mr. Chair, my colleague's comment makes me wonder why it is we don't have a soapbox derby for members. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Mr. Fazio, do you care to be heard on that? Do you care to be heard on that? Your remark?
I just said we all have our soapbox.
They just sometimes don't work so well. Any other members wish to be heard? Seeing none, Mr. Barletta is recognized for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H-Con Res 113 be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The resolution is approved in order to report favorably to the House. Our next item for consideration are the General Services Administration Capital Investment and Leasing Program resolutions. I ask unanimous consent to call up the resolutions in block. They will be considered as read and open and amendment at any point without objection so ordered. We are considering 16 resolutions approving 11 leases, 4 special emphasis program prospectuses, and 1 building purchase proposed in the General Service Administration's Capital Investment and Leasing Programs. I want to thank Subcommittee Chairman Barletta for his work on these resolutions and for continuing to push for cost savings, space reductions, and providing space for federal agencies. The work of the subcommittee over the last 5 years has saved the taxpayer more than $3 billion, and I urge approval of these resolutions in block. I now recognize Chairman Barletta to explain the resolutions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we are considering 16 GSA resolutions, including 11 leases, 4 special emphasis programs, and 1 acquisition. Approving these resolutions will save the taxpayer more than $71 million. In addition, the Consolidations Activities Program prospectus will save the taxpayer millions of dollars. 69 projects funded from prior year's consolidations will result in a 1.4 million square foot reduction in space and avoid more than $110 million a year in lease payments. Since becoming subcommittee chairman, we have worked on a bipartisan basis to lower leasing costs and ensure better space usage. After many hearings and roundtables holding GSA and its tenant agencies accountable, we are seeing that most agencies are finally getting the message. I urge my colleagues to approve the GSA resolutions en bloc.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize Mr. DeFazio for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I congratulate the subcommittee ranking chairman and the ranking member for this work. We've long advocated for more efficient utilization of lease space and not leasing space when other federal facilities are available. And this legislation will move us a long way down that path toward lowering the bill to taxpayers and unnecessary leasing of space that isn't needed. One of the resolutions also authorizes seismic mitigation programs, which will go to the older federal building in Eugene, and that's critical given the potential for the Cascadia earthquake, and obviously there are other structures, federal structures in Oregon, and a lot of non-federal structures that need the same kind of work. I'd also like to thank the chairman for working with us to ensure that this bill contained a few new and important provisions. All GSA lease resolutions will include language explicitly requiring GSA, hello, I hope you're listening, to provide information to the chairman and ranking member of the committee within 30 days of receiving a written request. This language will help ensure the GSA is responsive to the committee, both the majority and the minority. I've been here 32 years, and I've never seen anything like this administration saying we don't provide information to the minority unless the majority wants it. So thank you for helping correct that, and you might be very thankful for that a year from now. Second, all GSA lease resolutions will include language that makes it clear that no federally elected official may benefit from leasing property to the federal government, whether that official was elected before or after the lease was entered into, not the president, the vice president, nor any member of Congress. There should be no ambiguity. Yeah, my mind isn't working today. Ambiguity about this requirement. Third, all lease resolutions will include language requiring owners of lease space to disclose to the administrator of GSA prior to entering into a lease whether the owner is a foreign person or foreign-owned entity. The language directs GSA to notify the tenant agency of this disclosure so the agency is able to take necessary security mitigation measures. All three of these are common sense. I'm pleased that we were able to work on those with the majority, and I recommend passage of the legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Now I'll recognize Ms. Titus for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, am pleased to support these 16 GSA resolutions that authorize new acquisition, alteration, and leasing actions across the nation. GSA continues to improve its space management as mandated by this committee and the administration's freeze and reduce the footprint policy. I'm new to the Economic Development Subcommittee as ranking member, but it makes sense to me that the federal government should shed excess space and reduce workspaces when it's appropriate because this saves taxpayer dollars. The majority of these resolutions do just that. I'm also pleased that the chairman has worked cooperatively with our side on incorporating new language into these resolutions that address several long-term concerns that we've had about how the GSA operates its leasing program. Last year, the GAO found that the GSA was leasing high security space from foreign owners and identified risk posed by this ownership. Based on its finding, GAO made the recommendation that the GSA determine whether the beneficial owner of a high-security leased space is a foreign entity, and if so, share that information with the tenant agency for any needed security mitigation. Today's language imposes that simple notification requirement on GSA, and I look forward to working with the chairman on a more permanent legislative solution. Second, as the ranking member DeFazio pointed out, there's language also contained in these resolutions that prevents the president, the vice president, and all members of Congress from benefiting from lease agreements with the GSA. I would argue that most GSA leases already carry a provision that bars all officials that are elected to federal office from benefiting from GSA lease agreements. However, since GSA officials seem confused at points on this topic, the resolutions before us make the situation very clear. If you are an elected federal official, you should not benefit from GSA leases. You do not get to be the landlord and the tenant in federal buildings. I still have some outstanding questions related to President Trump's lease agreement with GSA for the use of the old post office as now Trump International Hotel here in Washington that I will continue to pursue. Even so, I'm pleased that the committee has taken steps to hold the executive branch accountable on the question of whether federal officials can directly benefit from federal actions. So I look forward to continuing to work with the chairman on this issue and other issues related to the GSA, including solutions on managing the federal real estate more efficiently. So I, too, would urge my colleagues to approve these resolutions. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Do any other members wish to be recognized? Seeing none, we'll consider the resolution for amendment. Seeing none, I now ask Mr. Barletta for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the 16 committee resolutions be approved en bloc.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and the resolutions are approved. At this point in the markup, I want to take an opportunity to recognize two senior committee staffers. And since this is what I believe to be the most bipartisan committee in Congress, I'm going to recognize, or going in that tradition, recognize one Democratic staffer and one Republican staffer. First, from the Democratic side, the longest-serving member of the T&I staff has just moved on. He's not here today. He's already in his new job, Ward McCarriger. Ward spent the last 25 years of his career serving the committee and this institution. He's worked on every major piece of legislation coming out of this committee in that time frame. Ward became a walking encyclopedia on the recent legislative history of the committee, and as I look on the walls with all those pictures of the chairman, he served and worked with every single one of those chairmen up there. I believe Norm Mineta was the one that hired Ward 25 years ago. While that could make him a formidable opponent at times, a worthy opponent always, he was also a key ally in moving good partisan legislation forward and upholding the committee's jurisdiction. He began on the committee, as I said, under Norm Mineta, working on transit issues, and fittingly, he's now continuing that work, transit on the outside. We wish him well in his new position. Finally, I'd like to recognize the full committee staff director, Matt Sturgis. Matt is also leaving the committee to go to serve in the administration. When I became committee chairman in 2013, Matt was one of the core staffers I hired to help me in that new role. It's probably been a very tough 5.5 years for him. As anyone on my staff knows, sometimes it can be challenging. And since agreeing to come to committee with me, Matt has done just about done it all. Before being promoted staff director, he served as deputy staff director. He was the aviation subcommittee staff director and director of member services. Every member in this room knows we couldn't do what we do without the hard work and guidance of really good, capable, competent staff, and Matt sets a high standard. He was instrumental in every legislative accomplishment of this committee over the last 3 Congresses, the FAST Act, PREA, the PIPES Act, WRDA, the WIN Act, and more. And we do have more to do this year, and everything we accomplish before the end of Congress will have Matt's fingerprints on it as well. On behalf of the members, I want to thank both Matt and Ward for serving the committee, this House, and the nation so ably. We're glad both of you will continue working to improve our infrastructure, and we wish you the best. So, Matt, thank you very much.
Well said, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't do better.
We will miss Matt and Ward, but the committee staff will continue to be in good hands. Chris Veason will serve as the staff director. Chris has been on Capitol Hill for a number of years, working for a number of members from the leadership staff to this staff. When I looked and saw that Chris was hired, he's been on it for like 16 months. It must have felt like 16 years. So we appreciate Chris's hard work. And also, Jeff Goslin will be serve as the deputy staff director, and he's an 18-year veteran of the Hill and been on this committee and around this committee for 18 years. So we've got a couple of able pros following Matt to the position on the committee. So again, thank you all, Chris and Jeff. Congratulations and good luck. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 4177, the Prepare Act of 2017. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Economic Development and Water Resources Subcommittee and call up H.R. 4177 that it be considered as read and open amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. H.R. 4177, the Prepare Act, is a bipartisan bill that improves the management of risks associated with extreme weather across the nation. 2007 was a historic year for natural disasters, costing the country an unprecedented $306 billion in damage. We need to take a variety of approaches to reduce those costs and save lives, and this bill helps us do so. I want to thank the bill's sponsors for their work on the legislation, and I urge support. I now recognize Mr. Barletta for...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Prepare Act creates an interagency council that will focus on increasing resiliency and risk management associated with extreme weather conditions, events. This bill will help continue to reduce disaster costs, which has been a priority for this subcommittee throughout my chairmanship. It is supported by a broad range of stakeholders, including Taxpayers for Common Sense, the Natural Hazard Mitigation Coalition, the Reinsurance Association of America, and the Nature Conservancy. I support favorably reporting H.R. 4177 and urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Now recognize Mr. DeFazio for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I fully support 4177, Preparedness, Risk Management for Extreme Weather Patterns, Assuring Resilience and Effectiveness Act. Prepare, that's quite a mouthful. You know, even though the official stance of the denizens inhabiting the White House is that climate change is a myth or fake news, it is happening. Extreme weather events are becoming more the norm than the exception. And this bipartisan bill introduced by Representative Cartwright with 13 original co-sponsors creates an interagency council to establish government-wide goals and priorities for extreme weather resilience, preparedness, risk management, assist state and local planners with identifying regional vulnerabilities and facilitating the adoption of resilience, preparedness, risk management, best practices, establish regional coordination plan to establish greater coordination, information planning on extreme weather mitigation and resilience. Over 30 organizations across the political spectrum support this legislation. Taking these steps will ultimately save lives and save taxpayers billions of dollars if we are better prepared as opposed to coming in after the extreme weather event has happened and trying to put things back together. So I recommend it heartily to my colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Now recommend Ms. Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also support H.R. 4177, the Preparedness and Risk Management for Extreme Weather Patterns, Assuring Resilience and Effectiveness Act of 2017. Better just to call it the Prepare Act and use the appropriate acronym. I congratulate my colleague, Representative Matt Cartwright, for bringing this to our committee. Just last month, our subcommittee on Economic Development held a hearing on the 2017 wildfire season and the need to mitigate against future fires. We heard in that hearing from a number of different witnesses that climate change is a major contributor to the increasingly frequent violent wildfires that we are experiencing in this country. We need to be honest that climate change exists, and I think this bill is a good step towards preparing us to deal with the impacts of climate change. We know that it's much better to be prepared for some disaster than to have to deal with the results of it after the fact. That saves money, saves lives, and saves the planet. So I urge my colleagues to support this measure, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. Any other members wish to be heard on this?
Mr. Chairman, I have a UC request to put a statement from Representative Plaskett in the record since she had to leave the hearing.
Without objection, so ordered. Any other members? Ms. Estes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, speak in support of the Prepare Act, H.R. 4177. The extreme weather events of this last year demonstrated remarkably and vividly how the preparedness plans in Florida, based on its earlier experiences in the 90s and the 2000s, really did help save lives and save property in ways that Texas, frankly, did not. And I think that was a living example to all of us of the importance of better policies and better plans. And we owe it to the American taxpayers and the American people to learn from those examples and to help do our best to share best practice. So again, strongly supportive of this legislation, and I urge our committee to vote it out and get it to the floor quickly. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Webster is recognized for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last year, Hurricane Harvey and Irma and Maria brought unprecedented devastation to communities across Texas and Louisiana and Florida, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands. It was a rough set of storms. We've now spent probably over $100 billion on the relief, which was certainly well spent. And the FEMA director last year testified, Brock Long testified that he was spending at the peak about $200 million a week. It's a lot of money. We're getting pretty good at responding to disasters, but we're not doing so well as far as coordinating any kind of preparedness. And this particular bill, I'm a happy co-sponsor of Representative Cartwright's Prepare Act because, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this up as one of the bills on this this markup because it's a very important thing to get a handle on it. I know Florida, after the hurricanes, we had 4 in a row in 2004 and 5, and we began focusing on preparedness. We rewrote our building code. It was for disaster relief. It was a great thing because the code focused in on a few things. One, the cornerstone of it was resilient construction techniques. And so that buildings, roads, bridges, dams, all built to withstand severe weather. The good thing about that is you can use those facilities the day after the storm. And I think it's an important act. The Prepare Act is a thoughtful approach to getting the federal government well ahead of future disasters. And so for that, every year we spend more money and recovering from natural disasters. I hope with this adoption of this bill, we can start spending money on preparing for disasters. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Graves is now recognized for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, since I've been on this committee, I've discussed a lot the fact that this nation has a backwards disaster policy whereby we spend billions of dollars after a disaster rather than millions of dollars before. We've had numerous hearings in this committee where we've talked about the disjointed approach of our federal government today, everything from FEMA, Corps of Engineers, HUD, Department of Interior, and many other resiliency programs that lack any type of true coordination or putting anyone in charge. This 27-page bill establishes a task force where it appoints 15 agencies, brings together in excess of 17 different disciplines. And it doesn't provide any clarity in regard to what the objective is. Mr. Chairman, just within the last year, the President or the administration withdrew the federal flood risk management standard because it similarly lacked, I think, local input. It lacked very much clarity in regard to how it was going to be applied at local levels. And it didn't provide the funding that was needed to ensure that local communities could actually comply with this. Mr. Webster noted that this nation has spent billions of dollars responding to the 2017 hurricanes, and he's exactly right. As a matter of fact, when you look back since 1980, we've spent in excess of $1.5 trillion responding to 215 different disasters that have cost over $1 billion each. It is absurd what this nation's doing. But this is not the solution. Bringing in, and I'll say it again, this bill is 27 pages. It uses the term extreme weather. We don't even do rainfalls well, much less extreme weather. This bill, I'm concerned, is going to come back and recreate, or in fact, add to the bureaucracy. It's going to recreate this model like Federal Flood Risk Management Standard, the National Levee Safety Standard, and other national standards that don't recognize local input and local problems. Someone noted from the other side a few minutes ago that the reason Florida was more resilient during the hurricanes than Texas was because of preparedness. That's not the case. Texas received over 50 inches of rain. These are apples and oranges scenarios coming from, I think, the most disaster-prone state in the nation. We at first were looking at this and trying to figure out what it was doing. We talked about doing amendments to this and actually adding some things that I actually think were going to bring merit to the bill. But rather than doing that, Mr. Chairman, we're going to withdraw our amendments. I plan on voting against the bill, and I just urge that we sit back down, think very carefully about what it is that we're trying to do here, and rather adding to the bureaucracy, actually streamline it. The Corps of Engineers, for example, has a backlog of $100 billion in water resource projects. Many of those are designed to actually make our communities more resilient. It's not standards, it's implementation of projects in many cases that is preventing our communities from becoming resilient. And I want to be clear on something. I'm not doing this because I'm concerned, or I'm rejecting the thought of climate change or sea rise. I've been very clear on that in this committee, that I am concerned about sea rise. I'm concerned about the trends. In my previous job, I measured, or two jobs back, I measured sea rise in the state of Louisiana, and we made sure to incorporate IPCC recommendations into the projects that we built to ensure future resilience of our communities. But I'll say it again. I think that work this committee's done in trying to improve the efficiency of project development and delivery mechanisms, and I think that the Disaster Reform and Recovery Act that this committee passed unanimously back in November and the House passed on December 21st is the approach that we need to be taking moving forward. Mr. Chairman, in closing, I'd just say that I'd urge that we take a careful look at this legislation. We think carefully about what objectives we're truly trying to pursue, be more prescriptive about those, and ensure that local planning, land ordinance issues, and local considerations are taken into account rather than adding to the bureaucracy here with a national standard that is inflexible. Yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman, and the gentleman makes a number of very, very good points, and I think this committee has been working hard to try to do some of the things, many of the things the gentleman is suggesting, and they're very good, strong recommendations. I'd say to the gentleman and anybody else on the committee, look, we're willing to work with you. You got to get in early. We need to have your ideas early on board when we're developing legislation. That's always a positive thing. And I would just point to Ms. Plaskett's not here right now, but I would encourage all of you to talk to Ms. Plaskett about the response the Virgin Islands is doing. It's really been a very strong response, not only from myself being down there, the staff reporting back. I met with the FEMA administrator, Mr. Long, and he was telling me that the good work that's happening, Ms. Plaskett and the leadership of the Virgin Islands. And just yesterday, we were talking about the HUD dollars, and the HUD dollars are supposed to go to individual businesses. And but they're talking about, instead of sending to individual businesses, their biggest asset down there is the port that brings in these, and if they're allowed to use those dollars to dredge the port, they can bring in more ships, which will benefit all the businesses. So because of the way the law reads, it's difficult to do. So I would encourage everybody to talk to Ms. Plaskett and urge the various agencies, HUD in this particular case, what makes sense sometimes is not to give it to individuals, but to give it to the community that will benefit everybody. And in this case, rising tide benefits all the ships, benefits the entire community down there, so to speak. So again, I appreciate what the gentleman says, and again, we'll continue to work with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to continue to improve the delivery system to respond to these natural disasters that occur. We'll now consider the bill for amendment. Seeing none, would now recognize Mr. Barletta for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 4177 be approved and reported favorably to the House.
The question is on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. The bill is approved and ordered reported favorably to the House. For our next item to consider is H.R. 5319 to transfer Coast Guard property in the town of Jupiter Island, Florida for inclusion in the Hobie Sound National Wildlife Refuge. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Coast Guard Subcommittee and call up H.R. 5319 and that it be considered as read and open amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. H.R. 5319 was introduced by our colleague, Mr. Mast from Florida. This bill transfers unused Coast Guard property on Jupiter Island, Florida to the Hobie Sound National Wildlife Refuge. I urge members to support this bill and now recognize Subcommittee Chair Hunter to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mast of Florida, a member of the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Subcommittee, is a sponsor of H.R. 5319. The Coast Guard property on Jupiter Island is proposed for transfer to the Secretary of the Interior for inclusion in the Hobie Sound National Wildlife Refuge. The transfer is a win-win. The Coast Guard will no longer have to manage land that is not in use, and the Department of the Interior will gain land beneficial to the wildlife refuge. I commend Mr. Mast for resolving this long-standing issue and urge all members to support the bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman and now recognize the subcommittee ranking member, Mr. Garamundi, for a statement.
Given that excellent explanation and Mr. Mast taking it up in a few moments to further explain it, I think this is just a fine thing. We go from Coast Guard to protecting birds. Yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I now recognize Mr. Mast for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for including my Jupiter Island land transfer bill in the markup today. For everybody not from Florida, it's Hobie Sound. It's not Hobie Sound.
Ooh,
you know, just to get that out there for everybody. This bill does transfer 4 acres of Coast Guard property to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. This is property that's gone unused for decades. It's very overgrown. It is best suited for birds and sea turtle nesting on site, and it would be absorbed into the Hobie Sound National Wildlife Refuge, which is great for our community. This has been decades in the making, and I'm very pleased to see all the stakeholders come together to bring this bill out of committee today. I thank you for this environmental preservation step, this approach towards land protection for the land that sea turtles inhabit, and I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Thank him for correcting my pronunciation. Any other members wish to be heard? Seeing none, I now, next page. Consider the bill for amendment. Seeing none, I now recognize Mr. Hunter for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 5319 be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Questions on the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The bill is approved and the order reported favorably to the House. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 5326, Maritime Technical Corrections Act of 2018. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Coast Guard Subcommittee and call up H.R. 5326, and that it be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. Title 14 of the U.S. Code pertains to the Coast Guard, and the Title 46 pertains to the shipping in the U.S. The bill makes simple and solely technical corrections to the two titles. I urge members to support this bill, and now I recognize Chairman Hunter to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Rayfield, the professional staff member on the Coast Guard Subcommittee. H.R. 5326, the Maritime Technical Corrections Act of 2018, was introduced by the Subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation's ranking member, Congressman Garamundi. The bill makes technical corrections to Title 14 and Title 46 of the U.S. Code governing the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation in the U.S. Title 1 of the bill clarifies the text of Title 14. For instance, it creates a definition of the Commandant of the Coast Guard and cleans up the rest of Title 14 to refer only to Commandant. Another example is changing enlisted men to enlisted members. This bill is not the big reorganization that was done by the committee in H.R. 1726 last year, but it will clean up parts of the title that are outdated or typos and makes it easier for the public and the Congress to read it. It makes no substantive changes to sections. Title II of the bill makes corrections to the text in Title 46. The definition section of Title 46 was in need of renumbering, and with the renumbering, cross-references using the definitions are corrected. Other changes include striking outdated provisions. Again, no substantive changes are made in Title 46, but the changes will make the title easier to read. There is a technical amendment for the bill, which I will discuss at the appropriate time, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. Now I recognize Mr. Garamundi for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know it's a shock to the general public and certainly to the members of the committee that occasionally there are mistakes made in legislation. Of course, we blame that on the lawyers, but in this case, we're trying to clean it up. The chairman has laid out the elements of the bill. The chairman and I worked very closely on the previous bill, H.R. 1726, the Coast Guard Improvement and Reform legislation. Unfortunately, there were some errors. The errors are now being corrected with this. And in fact, we're soon to take up an amendment to correct an error in this amendment to correct errors. So here we go. In any case, further counsel, let's blame it on the Legislative Council. Is that fair enough? No, we won't do that. In any case, this is the legislation. It'll clean it up, put us in good shape, and eventually, in a few moments, we'll take up an amendment to this bill so that we can have the bill correct. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
It's so confusing. It sounds like Congress.
We'll blame the chairman then.
Any other members wish to be heard? Seeing none, we will now consider bill for amendment. Chair recognizes Mr. Garamendi. I believe there's an amendment at the desk.
Yeah, the amendment corrects an error in the bill to correct an error. And
Without objection, so order the clerk will designate the amendment.
Right place.
Amendment number 1 offered by Mr. Garamendi.
Mr. Garamendi will explain, if he can, the technical correction to the technical corrections.
Yeah, you just did, Mr. Chairman. We'll let it go at that.
Thank goodness. Do any other members wish to be recognized on the amendment? Seeing none, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments? If seeing none, I recognize Mr. Hunter for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 5326, as amended, be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The bill is amended and is approved and ordered reported favorably to the House. I ask unanimous consent that each bill ordered reported today will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute, incorporating any amendments adopted without objection so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make all necessary technical, clarifying, and conforming changes to each of the bills ordered reported today to reflect the actions of the committee without objection so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman, after consultation with the ranking member, has authority to strike or revise any provision of the bills ordered reported today that would cause a sequential referral to another committee or would cause the bills or concurrent resolutions to be subject to a Budget Act or Rule 21 cut-go point of order. Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent the committee authorize the chairman or his designee to offer such motions as may be necessary in the House to go to conference with the Senate on H.R. 4673 as amended, H.R. 5294, H.R. 3288 as amended, H-Con Resolution 115, H-Con Resolution 113, H.R. 4177, H.R. 5319, and H.R. 5326 as amended. Ordered reported by the committee today or similar Senate bills or resolutions without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to the Rule 5 of the Rules of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, the chair notes the presence of a quorum for actions taken on all committee business today. He told me to hold. With that, the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure has completed its business for the day, and the committee does not stand adjourned. We want to hear Ms. Plaskett, who's here today. Ms. Plaskett, I was talking favorably about how the leadership of yourself and the others in Virgin Islands is doing, on all accounts, a good job of the response, and we really appreciate that. So you wish to be heard.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that you met with our governor, and you've offered your support. We're really grateful for everything that you've done as well. Listen, we have a long way to go still. We've lost a large number of our schools. Our kids are only on 4-hour shifts per day. They're sharing spaces. Our hospitals, we still do not have the critical care. Most of our long-term patients and dialysis patients are off island. But we believe that the work that was done by Congress, primarily to bring about a really substantial disaster bill is going to be a really steady set for us to begin the rebuilding process. And your support, the support of this committee in making the infrastructure needs and mitigating the damages that we had even before so that we can rebuild and be ready for the next hurricane season has been really instrumental, and I'm really grateful for the support, as well as the work that was going on right now, even after, with the PREPARE Act and so many other other bills that we're looking at in this committee. So thank you all for all of your continued support. And we're going to ask that, Mr. Chairman, you guys need to come down. The committee needs to come to the Virgin Islands and see exactly how that money is being put to use.
I'm sure I can get members to take you up on your offer. And I just want to, again, make the point that I made earlier when you weren't here, meeting and staff reports, meeting with the FEMA director, and again, talking yesterday with the governor and with you over the past months. It's important the work we do, but it's really important the work that the folks on the ground do to utilize those dollars in an effective way so that when we go, the next event occurs, we're looking at places and saying they didn't squander this money. They really used it well. They stretched those dollars, and I think Virgin Islands is a great example of that.
I'm waiting to see the action plan that the governor is going to be creating. I'm really hoping that there's a lot of community input and that we and other committees are going to really keep them to task to make sure that that money is used strategically and appropriately.
It's great. I thank the gentlelady. And with that, the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure has completed its business for the day, and the committee is adjourned.